Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens with mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Good afternoon, gentle listeners, and welcome to Yeah Nah Passaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
Joining us this week from Sweden is Bjørn Ihler, who is the co-founder of the Khalifa Ihler Institute. He was a founding member of the Extremely Together project, and he is recently the founder of the European Network of Anti-Fascist Monitoring. Thanks for joining us, Bjørn.
Yeah, pleasure.
I guess just to begin with, and it's a bit of a hot topic, you've recently launched the European Network of Anti-Fascist Monitoring. Why not just the European Network of Monitoring Fascists?
That's a good question. Actually, the name comes out of the founders and my collaborators at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, and obviously the project is about monitoring fascists, not anti-fascists, but at the same time empowering anti-fascists. And so we wanted to emphasize the anti-fascist angle in it.
We've recently witnessed some debate, discussion, controversy over another institute, the Centre for the Analysis of the Radical Right. And one of the issues that emerged in that context was the willingness of the centre to actually describe itself as anti-fascist. The European network is, as the name would imply, attached in some sense to anti-fascism. I was wondering if you could give an opinion about what anti-fascism is, what it means, and how it might inform the European network and its monitoring activity.
So, obviously, the Centre for the Analysis of the Radical Right debacle is kind of unfolding as we speak. And so it's early to tell where that will be ending up. But it is my belief that we need to be explicit about the fact that we are anti-fascist when doing this work. That's the objective of both analyzing and researching the radical right, the far right, the fascists, whatever label we are applying to them today, is to counter them, to prevent fascism. And that is an inherently political objective. And in the Anti-Fascist Network, we are trying to some extent to reclaim that label, which has been politically loaded, in particular over the last few years, where anti-fascism in itself has been quite often discussed as bad as fascism in kind of a weird horseshoe theory. But yeah, we are anti-authoritarian, we're anti-fascist. We're building on a long legacy and history of resistance against fascism and authoritarianism in Europe and elsewhere, and it's important to honor that and to be explicit about our standpoint and our work.
One of the projects undertaken by the Khalifa Ihler Institute is the hate map. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why it's important to track these things in the way that the hate map does?
So the hate map in many ways is the roots of the Anti-Fascist Monitoring Project, right? It started off by us wanting to illustrate the frequency of incidents related to the far right. There's been a large tendency in particular kind of within the state apparatus, within the counter-extremism world, etc., to place a lot of emphasis on the Islamist extremism, which to a large extent also has been fueling Islamophobic narratives, and that's obviously caused a lot of problems and added fuel to the fire for alternative and far right to a large extent. And so we wanted to demonstrate kind of the scope of the problem to some extent there. But we also wanted to illustrate that this is not a phenomenon that exists within the silos of the nation states. Quite often, far right extremism is described as domestic terrorism, while other forms of extremism and terrorism are described as international. We wanted to demonstrate that the far right is as, if not more, international in many ways than other terrorist groups and movements. And so that's where some of the work that we put into the Anti-Fascist monitoring project was heavily focused on those international relations, on demonstrating where there are relationships between individuals, groups, networks, political parties, etc., across national borders. And so part of the goal of this is both to push the discourse further on how we describe, both in academic circles, in activist circles, and in journalistic circles, the problem of far-right extremism as an international phenomenon, but also to create a tool that is useful for those working within the judiciary and in prosecution of far-right terrorists in particular, where we now can demonstrate that this is, in fact, international terrorism.
Bjørn, you've also expressed concern about the appearance of hate speech online and the circulation of that sort of discourse on major social media platforms. I'm wondering if you could speak to or about some of the work you've done with the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, which was established by a number of the major companies. And I ask also because you can elaborate on your role in that connection, but certainly Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and so on have experienced a good deal of criticism for their alleged failures in this regard in terms of restricting the distribution of this kind of speech. So I'm wondering if you can talk about your role at the forum and what the challenges are and whether or not you think these kinds of projects are being successful and achieving the goals that they've set themselves.
Wow, that's a bundle of questions right there. I think we're kind of tackling all of it piece by piece in many ways, right?
Sure.
First of all, the way in which I view the online space is as an extension of kind of meat space, physical reality. The online spheres are inherently connected to how our societies are. We've tended to kind of view the two as disconnected in some sort of way, which obviously they aren't. The users online are also people in real life. The people who are behaving in threatening and harmful ways online also tends to behave in threatening and harmful ways offline, and vice versa. And so that is kind of part of why I'm engaged in that work in the first place. What the social media platforms have been able to do is obviously amplify the worst in human behavior in many ways. To some extent, they are also capitalizing and thriving on that. What we've seen is that things that generate outrage generate clicks and more attention, etc. And scandals are always plentiful online, quite often rooted in hate speech, rooted in things that would fall well within the narratives of the far right in different ways. And so tackling that, I think, is really important in order to tackle the overall issue of the far right? And so that is kind of largely my motivations for working with the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. In that, I'm chairing the Independent Advisory Committee. The Independent Advisory Committee provides advice to the operating board and to the executive director of the organization. The organization's operating board has the founding members as representatives there. That is Facebook, that is Twitter, Microsoft, and YouTube. And so those are obviously some of the biggest problems in many ways when it comes to a lot of this issue. There's a multitude of other online platforms as well that are members of the organization right now. And the goal there is to provide tools to tackle these problems. Some of those tools are being used, especially in kind of the immediate reactions to attacks, like the attack we saw in Christchurch with a live streaming component, where getting that taken down quickly has been kind of a key element of the work of the organization. Obviously, reactions were not quick enough in 2019 during that attack, but we can build infrastructure to be able to react more quickly now. There's also the hash sharing consortium, through which the various platforms can submit things they see on their platforms that are terroristic propaganda, and then other platforms can take action on the basis of kind of automatic flagging of that content. Some of the problems with that has been a lack of good definitions frameworks. like what they've been looking for has largely been based on UN designation lists of terrorist organizations. As we know, those tend to be heavily biased against Islamist extremism, while completely ignoring issues like far-right extremism and fascist terrorism. And so we've been working as the Independent Advisory Committee to expand that definitional framework and make sure that more content from other forms of extremism are also added to the database so that those issues can also be tackled adequately. However, the biggest obstacles here is that the companies are still private companies. They still have the interests of their shareholders primarily at heart, and their business models are heavily based on kind of generating attention, collecting people's data, selling ad space, and all of these things that run contrary to a large extent to the objective of creating healthy communities on their platforms. And so it's been to some extent difficult to convince the platforms that implementing policies and implementing better sorting algorithms, etc., that don't exploit those base instincts in humanity to run towards the worst possible opinions or perspectives. It's been hard to get them on board with the idea of trying to change how they're exploiting that content in order to maintain people's attentions. So there's some back and forth there. At the same time, the platforms takes the issues seriously enough to have set up this organization. And so there's obviously some people within the structures who are willing to work with those of us in civil society and around who are concerned about this development as well.
You mentioned earlier this tension that exists within the countering violent extremism space, sort of whereby you have these organizations and state institutions that throughout the war on terror sort of probably contributed to Islamophobia.
Yep.
And now are having to deal with the fruits of their labour. What do you think the CVE industry needs to do to redeem itself?
Another good bundle of questions there, right? I think ultimately problem with the CVE industry, as well as with much else in this world, is a lack of rooting in universal principles. One of the problems that I encountered very early on in my work was that no one's clearly defined violent extremism, right? And so definitions often go by things like designation lists that tend to be kind of just a list of whoever we don't like this week. And so, that's really problematic from a whole range of perspectives, including the kind of promotion of Islamophobia that we've seen more or less happening by sometimes by design, sometimes by accident from state actors. From state actors' perspective, we've also seen massive human rights implications where the term terrorist is being used to label legitimate political opposition. And where we've seen the mass incarceration of people who constitute opposition to ruling parties, ruling dictators, etc. That all kind of is being excused within the framework of counterterrorism. And so in order to avoid all of that, I kind of rooted my work in what I'm calling the universal theory of violent extremism, which is that all forms of violent extremism ultimately are rooted in the violent denial of diversity. For a couple of years there, I traveled the world and met with former far-right extremists and former Islamists and former extremists of other shades and colors. And so on the basis of that work, I concluded that what they all had in common was, or what all the extremist movements had in common was this inherent fear of diversity within their communities. Far-right extremists wanted everyone to have the same color of skin or same ethnic heritage of different sorts or same, so to some extent also cultural heritage. Islamists wanted everyone to follow one particular interpretation of Islam within their communities. All of these groups are about creating through violence homogenous communities. And so my work really became about protecting diversity. And the frameworks we have for doing that are reasonably well developed, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's why we kind of have to uphold that and uphold some of these principles as we are combating terrorist movements. And in the war on terror, we've seen state actors be more than willing to throw that out the window immediately and to maintain protection of safety at the cost of liberty. And so these are kind of things that we've been grappling since the dawn of time, really, as humanity, but we're still dealing with it, and we're still seeing the fallout of it.
In terms of kinds of environments which contribute to the emergence of those that have been problematically termed lone wolf actors, one of the things you've identified at various points is the existence of social bubbles of one kind or another, and the absence of a means by which one can encounter the other in productive dialogue. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and how that manifests in terms of the online environment, but also, I guess, through other avenues. And, what do you think are the ways and means through which diversity can be protected and fruitful and productive dialogue between different people can take place?
Oh, if I had answers to all of that, we would have solved it all, right?
A few initial thoughts, Bjørn.
Yeah, no, so obviously the issue of filter bubbles. So I've given TED Talks and whatnot on as well, is a big one. The thing with it is that we tend, again, to think of it as primarily online phenomenon, but reality is that humanity has tended to be selective about who we hang out with since forever. We formed tribes that sat around bonfires and shared stories and had very strong stories about us and them, who belongs within the group, who does not belong within the group. And that tended to be shared, built on shared interpretations of the world back in the Stone Ages, right? And so what the online has been able to do is really just amplify that. And I spoke a little bit about this earlier, kind of the amplification of the worst in humanity. And that is part of it, right? We're now able to isolate ourselves to an even greater extent than we've ever been in history. We used to have to go down to the shop on the corner and meet the man who worked there, who quite often was different from us. But now we can sit in front of our computers and literally have everything delivered to our doorstep without having to even meet the delivery man. And so the isolation from interaction with diversity is really something that we've gotten better and better at through kind of the evolution of technology, and that has led to some real problems in terms of radicalization as well, where now we can be so selective about your tribes online that you don't have to interact with anyone who has divergent opinions or ways of viewing the world from you. And it's if someone annoys you online, it's a click of a button away to block them or mute them, right? So it's challenging and troubling that we don't even have to learn to live with the fact that people are different, have different religious views, have different ways of life, have different experiences and different perspectives to contribute to discourse. And so that's kind of some of the challenges. The solutions are kind of rooted in exposure theory to a large extent, and that we need to meet diversity. We need to meet people with different experiences, different opinions, different ways of life than us, and we need to learn about their humanity to a large extent. We're now dehumanizing the other, and need to learn to appreciate the humanity in all our fellow human beings. And so all of this is kind of interconnected. But at the end of the day, the reality is that it comes down to your ability to sit down and have a cup of tea with someone you disagree with, right? And so that's a learned skill as well. And we need to rig our educational systems or early age educational systems in particular in order to focus on that. But also we need to take responsibility throughout society to create environments in which it's possible to have healthy discourse that doesn't devolve into threats and dehumanization about topics we disagree with.
Bjørn, you are an extremely together young leader. I was reading before, which I thought was pretty groovy. But what is Extremely Together?
It's a group of people who were convened by Kofi Annan back in 2016. 10 young people from all over the world who are working together to counter extremism in different ways. So that's kind of the gist of it.
And how can we be extremely together?
By collaborating, by working across national borders, by working across cultures, by seeing that fundamentally when you're working against the far right, against fascism, against authoritarianism, wherever you are in the world or whatever identity or philosophy people are rooting their hatred in, we're largely working towards the same objective of creating healthy, diverse communities.
Apart from Extremely Together, you've obviously been involved in a number of different projects over the course of the last 10 years or so. What do you think you've learned through these various engagements, and what are the things that have most, I suppose, challenged you or you found the most interest?
So I've learned a whole bunch of things, right? It's always being engaged in all sorts of projects, meeting with people from all over the place who have different experiences and different perspectives. There's always a lot to learn about the world that we live in, about the ways in which issues are tackled in different places and in different cultures, and so on and so forth. It's been a roller coaster. The most challenging is always when people disappoint you, when conflicts get out of hand, and people you thought were on the same page appear to not be. And in those moments, it's kind of important to also remember that we live in a challenging world, that there is real difficulty with kind of standing up against fascism, standing up against authoritarianism, that there's people are putting themselves at risk and being exposed to some of the most horrific things in this world. And at the end of the day, kind of maintaining the faith in the best in humanity and understanding that at times we misstep on the basis of trauma, on the basis of being in a defensive position a lot of the time, is kind of the hardest part and the most painful part at times.
Just finally, Bjorn, obviously, as you just mentioned, there is a lot of traumatic material that people will encounter when they're working in this space, and it can be quite difficult. I was wondering what you could share for people working in this space. How can they renew themselves and stay sane, and how can people work with longevity in mind?
Working with longevity in mind has been the issue that I've been trying to resolve since having kind of really severe burnouts very early in my work. I've been talking about kind of the idea of sustainable activism. Obviously, there's different components to that. One of them is financial sustainability. We see a lot of really good work being done right now by anti-fascists and researchers who are dedicating literally all their spare time to the struggle against fascism, and who are not being compensated for that work, even when that work is being used in kind of the highest levels of government and so forth. And that's really problematic and troubling in terms of just the sustainability of those individuals. And so my heart goes out to them a lot. And then there is the mental health aspect of it, making sure that you sustain yourself in some sort of healthy way. And for me, that has largely been about finding really good people to work with, finding and establishing spaces for airing grievances and frustrations with trusted circles, with close friends who know the struggle, who are in the struggle, who are dealing with the same kind of materials as I'm dealing with, etc. And so finding groups and working together and knowing that you're not alone is really, really key. Finding good mentors, people to seek advice from when there are troubles, is also another one. And one thing we're working on and establishing right now is better infrastructure for not just the kind of academic and journalistic research side of things, but for the celebration side of things, we aren't good enough at celebrating within the anti-fascist world. And we do have victories every now and then, and that's worth celebrating, but it's also worth celebrating life itself. And so creating healthy spaces for anti-fascist activists to come together and to celebrate life together, I think is kind of a big next step for my work in this, and I hope we're kind of building towards that. And through things like Anti-Fascist Europe, we've really kind of laid some of the groundwork for both the research and journalism, for the sustainability of it, and for convening across our kind of conventional groups and national borders in really good ways to both advance the work and to advance the people who are committed to the work.
Well, Bjørn, we'll leave it there on, I have to say, a significantly more positive note than these shows usually end. Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find you on Twitter, you are at Bjørn IH. People can also find the Khalifa Ihler Institute at khalifaihler.org, as well as the Anti-Fascist Europe project at antifascist-europe.org. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, that's all we've got time for. We'll be back next week. See you later.
See you then.
To life, l'chaim, 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 to life. It's to the father I tried to be, it's to my bride to be. Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Life has a way of confusing us, blessing and bruising us. Drink l'chaim, to life. God would like us to be joyful, even when our hearts lie panting on the floor. How much more can we be joyful when there's really something to be grateful for? To life, l'chaim. To title my daughter, my wife. It takes a wedding to make us say, let's drink another day. Drink l'chaim. To raise a wolf, to death, yeah. To title your daughter, your wife. It gives us something to think about, something to drink about. Drink l'chaim to life. Raise a glass and drink a drop of fountain. Our own the drink good, what their favorite you. You know the when good, but your favorite two songs, man, it's as a reason we deserve it too. To us and our good fortune. Be happy, be healthy, long life. And if our good fortune never comes, here's to whatever comes. Drink l'chaim to life. Heaven bless you both, not drove ya to your health, and may we live together in peace, not drove ya. Heaven bless you both, not drove ya to your health, and may we live together in peace. May you all be better in the future of your choice. May you live together to rejoice. Heaven bless you both, not drove ya to your health, and may we live together in peace, not drove ya. Heaven bless you both, not drove ya to your health, and may we live together in peace.
And if COVID has shown anything, no government in Australia has had a planned approach to safety in terms of workers under COVID. Everything's been done knee-jerk. So whilst you've got market capitalism operating from a market perspective, we're only ever going to get knee-jerk things which involve huge exploitation, inequity and racism. None of these things are being planned or addressed in any long-term way. It's all stopgap and knee-jerk, and it is because of the role of the market.
Subscribe to 3CR, Workers' Rights and Union Struggles. Go to 3cr.org.au/subscribe or call the station on 03 9419 8377.
Live at the Bowl is back. The Open Air series returns from January to April with an exhilarating program of live performance. See some of the best homegrown and international acts on the Sydney Myer Music Bowl stage. Share a picnic on the hill, take in a symphony at sunset, or dance the night away to your favourite musicians. Explore the full program at artcentermelbourne.com.au. A 3CR supporter.